It's interesting with templates that there are lots of challenges that we've seen out there in the world with them. Um, Personally, I think there are kind of two kinds of templates that I've seen. There's kind of the templates of, say, what Microsoft provides with .NET, which is .NET new website, and it gives you kind of the scaffolding to get going with that. GitHub's templates kind of follow in a similar manner. It's like you can provide and build up all the necessary scaffolding with that. But once that template has been used, getting it in sync, like if you ever want to make any changes to it, is incredibly hard. And it's almost like these are almost like throwaway. I want to call them throwaway templates, but be like you write them with the knowledge of, hey, this is once this is created, I've lost all control of something like that. And then there's also the other aspect of I want to still maintain control. And I think this is kind of the area where, as within continuous delivery, this is something that we struggle with. Is this something that you're seeing as well, Steve?
Absolutely. I was having a conversation yesterday, and I was talking to a platform team who have created some really cool templates. And when they went to visit their developers, what they found was the developers would open these lovely templates that the platform team created, and they would cherry pick a couple of things out of it that they liked the look of into their own like repos and templates, and they'd just ignore the rest. So
Mm.
even like that's even worse than I suppose your quick start scenario because it's not even in sync on day one. It's
Yeah.
just never in sync.
Yeah, that's really interesting that they're cherry picking that. Now, is this a case where the application teams are really vested in their platform and their continuous delivery pipeline? Because the reason why I say that is because there are certain cases where I've seen where, especially with microservices, it's like I got so many things I got to worry about. I'm juggling so many different projects at the same time. I give you the repository and the Docker file, and it's like you basically figure out how to build it and deploy it. Like it's kind of like it's out of my hands versus the other side of that spectrum where it sounds like this particular team, they're very much invested in how their application's built, how their application's deployed, and probably how their application is running and everything like that.
I think there's two parts to it. One is like there's one where it's like I actually like this stuff and I want to be in control of it still, even though we have a
Hmm.
platform team. I think that is a part of it. And it's kind of cool that you have people that care that much because in a lot of places you don't have anyone that cares about the pipelines, which is much more terrible. The other one is if the template includes some components that you don't want to kind of be responsible for, maybe you don't copy them in. There's like
Yeah.
a some kind of DAST or SAST scanning thing, and it's going to generate a load of warnings, and you're like, I if I copy and paste this in, I'm going to become responsible for a whole bunch of work that no one has thought about giving me the time to do. And it's almost is the organization going to reward me if I copy that in and then fix all of those scanning errors? Or are they going to come and say, where are all of my features? So that kind of links back to that cultural thing, right? It's like onboarding isn't just here's a great platform. It's also we will give you time to get on board with it, fix anything that needs to be fixed. We'll make sure there is space to do that.
So I also want to come back to this team a bit and kind of understand a bit more about this template. Was it a kind of a singular template that the platform engineering team put together that said, this is how I'm going to throw out an example. This is how we deploy a .NET application to Azure with an Azure SQL backend. Like this is how we as a company want us to deploy. And then the application team kind of said, I'm going to pick and choose the bits that make sense to me. So basically, like they're given the entire process and they're picking and choosing. Or was it a case of there were multiple templates and they were just picking and choosing from each individual template as to what they wanted to do to kind of create what they wanted?
Yeah, so it was more like the first of those where there was a template that dealt with the whole thing end to end. And they did
Yeah.
have quite a few of these. This came up quite a lot, that there's a lot of fragmentation. All of the times an organization in the past kind of swung in a different direction. They tended to build new things using different technologies, but the old things never really went away. And so that can kind of build up over time. So you end up having to have like maybe you've got a whole set of like a Java stack, you've got a .NET stack, and now you've got a Go stack, and then you went to microservices, and that's going to be slightly different to the stuff that's more monolithic. So you end up with lots of templates, but they tend to be end to end. But it was like instead of pulling the template in and using it, they were kind of opening the template and kind of like, what
Yeah.
things do I want to take from this? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we like get a lot of ideas for other things when you kind of like look at a big example and you are like, what's the nugget in this example that is relevant to what I'm trying to do? But yeah, there is just that there are different motivations for cherry picking, but in all cases you end up with no benefit of standardization because no two pipelines are going to be the same.
Yeah. I uh, personally, what I prefer is individual smaller templates that kind of going back to the single responsibility principle and taking some of the lessons that we've had for years and years and years, kind of smaller templates to do one thing and do that one thing very, very well. So, for example, I built a template that will attach an SBOM to a release and verify the attestations, and that's all it's going to do. And it has all the necessary bits and pieces in there, and that's it. I'm not trying to do all things to all people. I'm not trying to generate a template that's going to be all things to all people. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see with these companies that do these full-on end-to-end templates. You start making these templates that are so unwieldy to account for all those use cases. And I think then you kind of create this self-defeating prophecy in the sense of I now have to account for this additional use case. Then I have to account for this additional use case. And then once you start doing that, then you start getting into the challenge of how do I keep all of these templates in sync? Because now I'm going to have all this fragmentation of all these different versions floating around out there because I added and I keep updating to account for all these different use cases. When in fact, if you kind of have these smaller individual templates, hopefully you're not making changes to them very often once you kind of have that initial push out the door and you fix the few bugs. And you only really make the
Mm.
modifications if I need to expand it out or maybe add additional resiliency on something like that. Not all these thousands of use cases that come in.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. One of the teams was doing this with those smaller building block type templates, and they were saying they were doing a lot of stuff in GitHub Actions,
Mm,
and they were quite strict on even keeping the template that they created in its own repo instead of having a repo called templates with everything in it. It was like, let's keep everything super granular, and that way the repo can have the template and a little bit of documentation about the template, and it's like really super small. And yeah, that's a good idea to make things more manageable. Um, but that's like so far, like most of the problems here are the getting started problem, actually
yeah.
taking the templates and using them. But you also like inevitably will need to update something in your templates, which can also be a problem, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think that's we call it like the day 300 problem. I need to change my tooling. And it could be something innocuous in the tooling itself. Maybe instead of logging to Splunk, you want to log to Datadog because we've signed some sort of big contract. And the actual functionality of the template probably doesn't change in terms of what the developer sees, but it might be something on the back end. But it is something you want to be able to push out. It could also be something completely big, but yeah, getting that pushed out and making sure that everyone is on the latest version is a huge problem because there it hasn't been really a good solution except for the you are going to use this template and you cannot modify this template. I have created this basically instead of a golden path, I've created this golden prison for you. And I'm the only one that has I'm the gatekeeper to it. I'm the only one that can make any changes, or a small group of people can make these changes to it. So it's kind of like these two very different ways of approaching something like that to solve a particular problem.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in a lot of cases, updating the template isn't really the big problem because that would involve finding where the template is being used. And
Yeah,
in a lot of cases, is that even possible?
yeah, that's it. Especially in situations where it's in say a bunch of Git repositories. Um, and if not everyone has the same branching strategy, if not everyone's doing like trunk-based development and everyone's using main, or if they're using something like Git flow, and it's like, well, okay, what branch should I actually update, and then what branch is the template being built off of, and what's the server actually looking at, you know? It creates a whole workflow problem. I remember being at a conference a couple years ago, and one of the participants, one of the speakers, they got up and they walked through this entire workflow that they had built on how to update templates using pull requests and going through every single team's GitHub repo and doing all these various pull requests. And I was like, wow, that is some wild stuff. Because then you not only that, then you have to go into the actual file, like the say the GitHub action itself, and find the piece that you want to update, and then make sure you insert code, but you don't overwrite code. You insert the code and you insert it in the appropriate spot. And it's like, will it work? Maybe, but that's also why you have the pull request, in case it doesn't work.
Uh,
It reminds me of a global company that I worked for that had so far won business in 17 different markets globally.
Hmm.
Um, and because this had all started from them being successful in one market, the way that they had gone into the second market was to copy and paste their application and do the things that that second market needed, right? Because it was the quickest way of winning that second market, get money in the door. And but they just hadn't switched out of that mode by the time they got to 17. So we had to try and bring that all together into a single code base because it was unmanageable. You know, you'd have a bug fix that was raised in one country and you'd fix it. And then you'd go through the other 16 code bases, and sometimes you could just put the same fix in. But sometimes you'd be like, that file doesn't exist in this code base.
Yep.
There's a different file that handles this in here, and it has very different code in. And then you have to work out, is the bug present in that code? And how do I fix it if it is? Because it's a different fix. So, like, that's the kind of problem that I could see happening with templates if you don't have a way of joining them all together. It's that we have to introduce this new, maybe it's a new compliance requirement, or maybe it's, like a verification step. And you might end up having to work out how to introduce that thing in several different ways because everything has drifted apart.
I think.
get to a point
Uh,
where can you
Go
even
ahead.
call it a template anymore?
Yeah.
Because it's changed so much. It's like it
Yeah.
was a template, but now.
It's the it's the ultimate ship of Theseus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I think fragmentation is probably the thing that kills templates more than anything. I think that's kind of what we've been dancing around, is this concept of fragmentation. And it's not just fragmentation of, you know, the teams maybe trying to modify the template or having different types. It could also just be the versions that are running in production. You could have a team that's running version 1, another one's running v.1.1, another one's running v.1.2, and so on and so forth and so forth. And so you're never 100% sure of when I want to update this template. Okay, now I have to update it not just for v1, but I have to update it for all of the different versions. And how do I handle that? How do I get everyone on that same version or within reason? Kind of how like Kubernetes does with kubectl. Kubectl will work with certain number of versions back and a certain number, basically, yeah, a certain number of versions back of the current Kubernetes cluster that they support. But there is a finite amount. They just kind of drop support and say, okay, we're not supporting this anymore. So it's almost like you have to have that kind of same mentality with your templates. Yeah, we're going to support this, and this version, the latest one, and then maybe two minor versions back or two patch versions back, or whatever comes up, to avoid that fragmentation. Because otherwise, I don't know how you keep it up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think that I would appreciate a mode for GitHub Actions that instead of me saying which version I want to use, it's like I kind of say which, if there was a manifest that said
Hmm.
how I interact with it, as long as that manifest is the same, I don't care what the version is. But if the manifest changes and I now need to supply a different parameter or something, then it would kind of say you have to now take some action. But
Yeah.
if if I don't care about the change, they're like improved, version 2 to version 3, they've improved a whole bunch of things and changed some behavior behind the hood. But effectively, it's like I'm using the checkout action if the code ends up kind of pulled, so that I can then do other things to it. I actually don't care about the
Yeah.
details.
Yeah. I start at point A, and then I get to point B, I don't care how I accomplish that. I could go on a completely different route with different versions. As long as A is the same and B is the same, no one really cares. Um,
Yeah.
I when you were saying that, you know what it reminded me of, which I'm gonna sound, it sounds bananas when I say it out loud, WCF, because you would specify the contract, and as long as the contract didn't change, you could make whatever changes on the back end you wanted to make. You could keep on pushing out updates, but as long as that contract didn't change, no one really had to worry about, updating what they had to do.
It's less about version numbers and it's more, it's almost like structural typing for
Yeah,
that interface. It's
it
like
really
as
was.
long as it quacks, we'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, a really good analogy is think about microwaves. As long as the general concept of the microwave, the keypad is there and there's a few buttons to, for quick start, like popcorn or defrost or something. Yeah, if I go to a microwave in the UK and you come to you use a microwave in the US, I'm willing to bet you're going to be able to figure it out pretty quickly because the interface is pretty much the exact same. But the innards are going to be completely different because you have different voltages than we have different voltages. But it's going to be the exact same, and from our point of view, like there's nothing else that's really going to change. There's a door, I open it up, I put the stuff in there. Where you really get confused is when you go to really, I would say, less than modern hotels. Let's call it that. And their microwaves are the old turn dial, and you're like, I'm not 100% sure how this works. Like you're changing the rules up on me. When you change the interface, then there's that problem.
We need some more microwave designers to help us with the platform engineering problem because they seem to have nailed this without, might I add, a universal standard with a funny name. Like
Yeah,
there's no MW 62005 standard that they're all going to. It's just we don't really need much more than the kind of turbo quick start type button and maybe something to increase the timer.
yeah. That's when I was in university, my C++2 is C with classes. The professor was talking about interfaces, and that was the analogy he kept using for us. It's like you're going to provide an interface for for the consumer, and you're going to abstract away and hide away everything because you think about it, like you're responsible for making sure people's eyeballs don't explode as a microwave manufacturer. You just give the people the appropriate things to make sure that they can get it to operate, but like you don't want to give them all of the control to basically nuke whatever they want and have it go beyond the parameters of safety. And it's kind of the same thing I think with templates as well, is you want to give your users an appropriate set of parameters or an appropriate interface to interact with, but ultimately as the template producer, you're the person that's responsible for putting the appropriate abstractions in place to put the guardrails in place to make sure that they don't cause any sort of damage with what they provide.
So
See,
with
was
this in
there
mind,
any?
oh sorry,
Oh,
Tony, go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, was there any conversation in the room yesterday about those platform teams, like their next step? What are they looking at as the sort of bridge to fix that, or where they go next?
There was a ton of discussion on this because this is the thing, right? We kind of most folks were agreeing on the challenges. We knew the problems that we're all facing that all look very similar. But the question is like, what is the answer for solving these problems? And depending on your tool chain, there might not be an answer in your tool chain, right? It might be how do we manage this through process and culture and communication and things like this. And I think what everyone is looking for a little bit is for their tool chain to actually start solving this problem for them. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be the key to this, right? Because I suppose an example would be if you're copying and pasting templates in GitHub Actions, maybe you work out that what you should do is create a custom action that people can then reference so that then now there isn't a copy of this thing everywhere. They can kind of call it. And like you still have to kind of manage when you upgrade a version number, you have to kind of try and get everyone to upgrade to that new action. There'll be some policy to try and do around that. But that's the tool taking a bit of the lifting. And that's kind of what we're hoping to do, right? Is that we're trying to give platform engineers some new things in their deployment tool chain that allow them to push this problem down so they don't have to deal with that for deployments and policies.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is when you don't have your tool chain trying to solve these hard problems, and I want to say solve them in a non-bludgeoning point of view, which means like you're going to come up with a solution, but it's going to be so restrictive that it's no one really wants to use it. Uh, if you, going back to your GitHub Action example, that's a really elegant solution to that problem. I'm going to create this custom action. I'm not going to try to create an entire GitHub action like file, and everyone has to use this one action file, and there's no deviation from it whatsoever. So that's what I mean by non-bludgeoning, because when you don't have your tool chain working to solve this problem in an elegant solution, this is where I think you start coming up with the scripts, start coming up with your own processes and DIY in it and trying to accomplish all these different things. And that can lead you down a really dangerous path because now you are, as a person, now you're responsible for that process until either they replace the tool chain or you leave the company. And those are really the only two options. There's not I can go ahead and put this down because once it goes into production, that's something that you have to manage because now it's become production critical because it's going to be used to change production.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are always fragile as well. We managed to standardize across a whole bunch of projects that we had. An organization I was working at that did web portals. We standardized our global.asax, but we had our websites in different repos. So we ended up creating something that sat above all of that that would pull all of those repos, and then it would take the kind of template global ASAX and move it into all of those repos and then create a commit to push that back into each repo. So we're trying to create this thing that sat above everything. And, there were loads of reasons why this could go wrong, and why you could have problems. And depending on how long it ran, you could end up with problems with something else happening whilst this process was running. So it was a bit gnarly, and that was what happens, right? You end up writing your own code to try and fill that gap, and that's usually where the weakness comes in. And you find out that one of them hasn't been updating for a year because somehow it didn't get added to a list or something.
I I I also come back to is not only that you're filling in this gap, but it's also this expertise that's because as a developer, you look at the tools oftentimes that's provided to you as they exist in their current state. And we get this all the time at Octopus. People will ask for a feature or they'll ask for a change, and it's based on how Octopus Deploy exists at this particular point in time, not what it could potentially look like in the future, not how we want to change it. And in fact, we've introduced when we introduced our project version control, that was meant to solve a number of different problems, but solve it in a different way than what people were asking for. And so, again, back to your example of updating these global.asax files, you end up in this very gnarly situation because you're trying to use the tool as it exists today. And so you're coming up with all of these kind of, lack of a better term, kludgy solutions to hopefully get it to work. And unfortunately, when you have a tool that, you are also paying for their expertise to help you solve this particular problem. And you might not even know that there's a different solution, might not even know that there's a better way. All you know is the way that you've done it in the past and your expertise in your own biases on something like that. And so it's kind of like there's that old Simpsons scene where Homer's smashing an orange against his head, and Troy McClure says, "Hey, there's a better way to make orange juice." And Homer's like, "There's a better way," because you just don't know. You don't have that expertise. You just know, like, I'm a developer. This is how my tools work at this particular point in time, and that's really it.
So
Yeah.
I think we should probably wrap up by explaining how has Octopus decided to deal with all of these copies of templates, right? How does it go and update all these different copies that are hanging around and fix all of the drift and all of those problems? What is the solution to that?
That's a very interesting question. So with process templates, we've come up with this updating workflow. And what we've allowed you to do is first you specify the type of change that you are making to your template. It could be a major change, a minor change, or a patch change. And the consumer can elect to automatically accept either all minor changes and patch changes or just all patch changes. And then if there's major changes, meaning there's a breaking change and there's going to be some sort of manual work. You've removed a parameter, you've added a parameter, something else has changed. And so allowing the consumer to kind of select how they want to handle this. But what's really elegant about this solution is that when we reference the template within Octopus Deploy, we're not referencing all of the steps. We're not referencing the entire template. It's not a copy of that template. It's just basically, for lack of a better term, a pointer to that template, and then we're passing in the appropriate parameters. So if we have to make any changes to that template, we don't have to really update any of the processes, especially if the parameters don't change. Back to use the lack of a better term, the contract. If the contract doesn't change, as far as Octopus as far as the deployment process is concerned, it doesn't really have to worry about it. It's like, okay, great, I've accepted the latest change. Happy days.
And this is what's elegant about it. Just like each of us, that template only exists once.
Yeah,
So you don't have drift, you don't have customization or cherry picking. It's like completely safe from all of that, which I think is super amazing. That I was super impressed when it was explained to me how this worked. I had one of those moments where I was like, I never would have thought of this because my brain thinks in terms of pull requests and merging and
yeah.
conflicts and all of those things. And this completely gets around all of those in a really elegant way, which is super cool.
I think what we did is we took a lot of lessons that we learned from step templates and having them be part of the deployment, like not say completely part of the deployment process, but really lots of pieces are part of the deployment process, and go, okay, what can we do better? What mistakes did we make and how can we improve this? And then how do we have a proper versioning scheme, and make it super easy for people to bring in these changes where appropriate.
Very good. Yeah. Everyone check out Platform Hub and keep an eye out for more things coming down the line. We don't give Octopus enough of a push sometimes. There we go. We can wrap up
Like
with
and
that.
subscribe.
Yeah, yeah. It's our version.
Yeah,
All right.
we will have a we'll definitely have more demos and more items. So if you're curious about seeing a demo of Platform Hub, reach out to us. We'd love to show you what we've been working on. Lots of really cool stuff. Uh, I just recorded a whole bunch of videos, so definitely, I'm really jazzed. This is something I've wanted in the product, basically since I started using it over 10 years ago.
Nice. We will link those videos in the description. Look at us. Look at us go.